Well, hello everyone. You hear a show right here. I'm talking about right here is like a little cartoon, animated, painting right here. I'm talking about for the press, secretary right here, and you see right here that I don't know if everybody has been following up about what they're talking about on the news, if it's going to be with COVID or something like that, or something about what about the elections or something like that. There's things that they're talking about up there in the White House, and a lot of times it's like, whenever you do listen to a lot of the conversations, a lot of times, and it's like, that somebody's going to be asking the questions and, wanting to know about the misinformation, stuff like that. But it sure seems that way number one, that you want to know too, why is it that you would maybe want to look after the conversation is like, looking at that, like the cartoon version. And let's just say that if you're trying to show your kids and maybe teach your kids a few of the basics about, a lot of stuff whenever it comes to, the news headlines. And also it could also be, the latest, the head. I'm like, yeah, the news reports and, anything about what they're talking about on the television. And a lot of times you want to know too that if there was going to be any source of cartoon version released of a lot of the news headlines. And do you think that maybe our kids will be able to understand that just a little bit more? And at the time you want to know too that really there really does not really need to be a cartoon version released of the Associated Press or anything. But let's just say if there was that, do you think that maybe like anybody say, is toward, cartoon version of the speech though? And you want to know too that for any reason at all, that if you're going to be watching these sorts of cartoons though, that really, that are you really going to be watching it just because it's for kids, or if anything, that just to show the kids and maybe to teach a lot, anybody, I'm like, anybody else might even say too that really we're not talking about any particular comic books or anything like that right here. But on the other hand, that if we were talking about the press secretary right here, talking about for Jen right here, that whenever somebody's going to be asking the questions a lot of times, and it sure seems that way, that she's going to come up on the TV for about an hour and just to answer a few questions and all that. And one thing that I did notice a lot of times is that just like at the president, where it's going to be coming on TV, and at 102, that do you think that it's possible that more questions come in whenever somebody's going to be given a reasonable answer a lot of times? And let's just say if that's the case, to where that somebody's going to be given a reasonable answer. And so somebody, I'm like, if it's going to be maybe a question in the back, or maybe somebody in the middle, or maybe somebody on the left or on the right. And I think a lot of it has to do with also between the Democrats and the Republicans. So it sure seems that way, that that half the time you want to know too that if it's really about the fact about if it's really called the clear answer. So a lot of times it's like, clear answers. The clear answers toward that somebody someone on the left. Someone on the left, then that person on the right. So it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about the press secretary right here, though, that sounds like a real big a real big job toward that by the time you actually start speaking to the people in the White House, right? And it sure seems that way, to where that whenever you do start talking and start answering questions, a lot of times that you probably want to know too that a lot of times, though, that whenever you're trying to make a speech about something, that you're trying to speak up to where that about what people are saying in regards to what goes on in the country. And so in order to be able to do that, it seems like a lot of times people might say is toward, well, based on the information that you're reading to the people, and like anybody who's going to be you know I'm like, yeah, if they're going to be asking a question, and based on the information that you have, based on the data that you have, and at the time, we want to know too is toward it. Yeah, well, really, that whenever you're going to be talking to the press secretary, a lot of times, it sure seems that way toward it. Yeah, well, really, that there's only so much information that's provided, and also that whenever somebody is going to be asking the question a lot of times, is that, yeah, well, really, about how much information have you found out within the past 2 days, 2 or 3 days. And a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when somebody's going to be asking a question, a lot of times that they're going to be asking about okay, the latest news, and then maybe the latest progress, and maybe anything that for what goes on, right? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever the press secretary is going to be answering those questions, a lot of times, like, it sure seems that way toward that, with all that's going on, that you're trying to remember about, okay, is today Friday or is today Monday? Okay, what is today? And so it's like, yeah, so let's just say that the press secretary is going to be making a speech about something, and let's just say if it is Friday, and let's just say that, with any information following by Monday, and a lot of times you want to know too that, does the press secretary start thinking about it as to where, okay, if today is Thursday, but I should have that information by Monday morning. So a lot of times, whenever you watch a lot of these newscasts, a lot of times that it seems like that, yeah, it's within about every 48 hours or so, about every 48 hours, that there's going to be new data. And if you want to look at that, to where that there's going to be new data that's going to be possibly be needing for update, or if anything that somebody's going to have a question about something, or maybe about anything about what's called correspondence and all that. But it sure seems that way, that when we talk about the news press, a lot of times, that that's also another way of stating to where that's going to be on TV rather than maybe normal programming. So let's just say that, yeah, well, if somebody's going to be watching TV, and let's just say they're going to be turned on the TV, and let's just say that, yeah, well, really, normally you would be watching cartoons or maybe a few of your favorite TV shows, but then there's going to maybe be a moment of time to where that there's going to be something on TV to where that we interrupt your normal broadcasting just to bring you the President of the United States, or just to bring you the press secretary or something like that, or maybe the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that yeah, a lot of things that normally that would be on the news normally, and let's just say that between 8 and maybe 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, that there will be cartoons on. And let's just say that that was the case, to where yeah, well, normally there would be cartoons on, but yeah, a message brought to you by the Speaker of the House or something like that, or a message brought to you by the Secretary, by the press secretary or something like that, or the Speaker. And so whenever you're watching the news, a lot of times that a lot of times it sure seems that way, that all the things that's going on, a lot of times it sure seems that way, that you want to know too, that if there's more questions than answers, and then knowing that, okay, if anybody is being reasonable with how you respond to a question. So let's just say that that most of the time, for what you hear about, is a lot of it is about misinformation, especially misinformation in anything that they're talking about in regards to getting vaccines, and also whenever it comes to a lot of things that they're talking about on the news, right? But at the time, you want to know too that why can't it really be about if the actual meeting for today was to talk about job creation and also the tax credit or something like that. But then other people are going to maybe having questions about other topics, and let's just say those other topics are going to maybe be about the border or something like that, or maybe it could also be about children living in poverty or something like that, or it could also maybe be about other things that they're talking about on the news. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that 1 hour that the press secretary is able to speak for 1 hour. 1 hour, then, for 1 hour that you're able to speak about stuff that's been going on. Yeah, for 1 hour. 1 hour that you're able to speak about stuff, but then also that people are going to be, kind of like going, from around the table to further in the back. Okay, do you have a question? Or, hey, that right there in the middle, and I know a lot of people probably thinking too that, you go ahead and you take somebody's question, but then you don't get back to them within 2 minutes. I'm like, I'll get back to you, or well, if you got a question, well, I can only answer one question. And so it sure seems that way, that when we talk about the press secretary a lot of times, that it's like, that a lot of times, do you necessarily think that it takes up to 5 minutes to be able to give, an answer to where whenever somebody asks a question, and then, they're going to go ahead and ask another question. So let's just say that, during the conference meeting, though, that one person can ask one question, and then it goes to the next person. So at the time, you're likely want to know too is toward it whenever you do ask one question, that it's like, you go ahead and give a reasonable answer, and then you gotta go to the next person, right? But it sure seems that way. That really, that where you go ahead and ask the questions, though, and you want to know too is toward it, about really, if there was a if there were only 5 questions that you had to get to within an hour, then maybe that you would know for sure that okay, compared to this meeting, compared to this conference meeting, that compared to the fact about is toward if you have only 5 questions, and maybe that you were not given 5 answers. So out of those 5 questions that you were given in 102, that whenever you do attend a lot of those press meetings, though, it seems like that there's 50 questions. 50 questions altogether. That could also be about, what the doctors and scientists are saying. So let's just say if it's 50 questions, 50 questions altogether. So it sure seems that way that, 50 questions within 60, 50 questions within 60 minutes. So how many of us would probably say too that, really that to try to be reasonable though, and you may want to know too that the job seems a lot harder than what you really think it is whenever you're trying to get to at least 50 topics, or maybe 10 topics and maybe 50 questions or something like that. But it sure seems that way that whenever you first start talking about something, though, that you're trying to tell everybody about what's going on, what has been going on for the past 3 days, and the stuff to follow up with, right? And it sure seems that way that when we're talking about the press secretary, though, it's like we're talking about is just to try to make it brief and brief and. So I guess what does it mean that when we're trying to make a conversation brief, and what does it mean to make something brief? And it basically means is to make it make it short. Make it short. Please explain, but then make it short. Just to make the long story short, though, that you go ahead and talk, in just like in 5 paragraphs. 5 paragraphs just to explain the story. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, that. So it's like everybody else would say too, that if you're going to be secretary, press secretary, a lot of times that reading that prompter, and you'll want to know too that whenever people are going to be asking the questions, a lot of times that maybe that you're able to explain within 5 paragraphs that this is what's going on. But a lot of times it seems like that if somebody were to ask another question, and let's just say that maybe somebody else asks a similar question, you're just trying to read and understand what their question is, and that seems like that makes it quite a bit more like everybody else would say too. If you're going to be secretary, then maybe it seems like it's all about getting used to the fact that people want to ask the questions, that people are trying to ask the questions, and you're trying to make a brief to where that you allow it, to allow 5 minutes per time that somebody's asking the question, and to try to get a better understanding about what the question is and anything that they're trying to add and all that. So it's like, so by every time you listen to those conversations, most of the time, it sure seems that way to where for what the things that have been going on, though, that it sure seems that way to where that will really, the United States is really looking, at the for progress and knowing about that, for things that are going on in this country. And you want to know too that since the president took office, that the things that have been going on, in the country, since then, the 6 months since he took office, and you will likely want to know too that before he took office and the things that have been going on. So a lot of times, it sure seems that way that the president probably knew that he was going to have a big responsibility, and one of them it was to handle it was to handle the pandemic, and then also about other things that's going on, and but it sure seems that way to where that when we speak about politics, though, that it's like that whenever you're going to be press secretary, a lot of times you want to know too is to where that number one, do you really like working with people at their parties? I'm like, do you like working with the members of the party, members of the Senate? So let's just say that if we're talking about maybe up to 250 people all divided between parties, and so let's just say that if we're talking about the parties right here, the parties are divided to where that up to 40 people per party, and I'll just say 40. I know that there might be a lot more than that, but let's just say if there's 40 people altogether per party. So if there's going to be the Democrats, and then there's going to be the Republicans, and Democrats, and then there's going to be the Republicans, right? So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about the different parties right here, and you want to know too, to where that does that mean to where that each person has the right to speak up about something, or does that basically mean is to where each person, one person is taking down notes, one person is actually communicating with somebody? I'm like, so it's like a lot of times it's like 40 people per party, and it sure seems that way that by the time you get up on that by the time you get up there on the stand, just to be able to talk about something, and let's just say maybe if it's going to be at the conference meeting, or if it's maybe going to be at the assembly or something like that, and you want to know too is to where that whenever you're talking in front of a group of people like that, and just want to know too is to where that you may want to know too is to where about how hard the job is, then compared to where compared to listening, and maybe compared to reading off the conversations and reading off the feedback that you get from maybe from the president, or maybe from the congressman or something like that. So it sure seems that way that like everybody else would maybe say too, that the whole purpose about the job sure seems that way to where that really that getting to know the people, to where whenever somebody's going to be asking the questions a lot of times, you give them a reasonable answer a lot of times, right? But it sure seems that way that when we speak about, yeah, when we do speak about the press secretary or when we do speak about the Speaker of the House or something like that, it sure seems that way that, really, that if all you got to do is just, coordinate, if all you got to do is just coordinate with the parties, between the Democrats and the Republicans and all, but still that everybody else might even say that yeah, the job seems to be. I'm like, yeah, it's a big job, and too that for the things that will be called big jobs and compared to the quarter jobs or something like that, or the jobs or what you call is toward it. Yeah, well, I am not the expert, and I'm not the expert or genius about whatever what the topics are, and so it sure seems that way toward it. When we talk about speaking at the press secretary right here, toward it, you have to be perfect. Whenever it comes to answering questions, and the first thing that you're gonna maybe think about is toward do you really have to be a perfect? Do you really have to be an expert in answering a lot? I'm like, yeah. So really, that when we talk about expert, though, that you really have to be smart, yeah, intelligent, but really that the key factor matter, I guess we could all probably think about is toward just knowing that when we think about the Speaker of the House, when we do think about the press secretary right here, the press secretary, and anything else that that they're talking about up there in the White House, though, that one thing that we can probably think about is toward that yeah, give toward that I'm like, yeah, to be able to give reasonable answers and knowing about the any conversations that you're going. I'm like, yeah. So really, that it seems like to me though that it's all about the fact about is just toward that whenever you're going to be giving a speech about something, though, that it sure seems that way to where that yeah, it's all about that coordination. It's all about good confidence and coordination. So let's just say the communication. So a lot of times that the first thing that somebody's going to maybe say is toward it's all about having good communication with the people. I'm like, yeah, the people who are up there, asking the questions and want to start the conversations and knowing about how do you handle it whenever somebody's going to be asking you the questions. And sometimes we're talking about within 30 seconds or so, within 30 seconds that somebody's going to be asking you a question. And a lot of times that's usually the case to where it's not within minutes, but it's within seconds. To where send a within seconds, and so it sure seems that way that whenever you start talking about something, and and then that's whenever people are going to start raising their hands, and so it sure seems that way that the first thing somebody's going to maybe say whenever you're going to be secretary a lot of times, you're going to be talking to a group of audience, right? And a lot of those audience, most of the time, at least, if some of them are going to be keeping pretty quiet and just listen to what you got to talk about, is really all what they're doing to compare to the people who are going to be raising their hands and want to speak up about something. So it sure seems that way that really, would you much rather be working in front of a group? Would you much rather be working in front of a party that's going to be quiet most of the time than compared to the ones who are going to be having questions? And I know the press secretary will probably say that the reason why she's there, of course, is to answer questions, right? It's not really about the fact about that you're going to be speaking up in front of a group. You're not really talking. You might be talking maybe. If the kids are going to be listening, but still, that most of the time, like people are going to be saying, to where if you're going to be speaking in front of an audience, though, those audiences are going to be quiet most of the time, right? But let's just say that, if there's going to be one question about every 30 seconds, there's going to be a new question that's going to be available, right? And so it sure seems that way that when we speak about the things that they're talking about on the news, though, and you want to know too toward it, yeah, well, really, that you know, are you really are you able to get to everybody's question or the fact about that for all the things that's going on, that you want to know too that okay, from all the things that's going on, that you're only able to to answer so many questions, but still that we're talking about every 3 weeks or so that knowing about all the things that's going on up there at the White House and everything, and you want to know too that we're talking about that whenever it comes to every 3 weeks, that maybe new data that's going to be released, and maybe about anything that they're talking about on the news. And you want to know too that okay, yeah, well, really that a lot of the questions that that the people have to talk about a lot of times, and it sure seems that way that really all the answers very clear, or like everybody else might even say too, that that when we're talking about the press secretary, though, it sure seems that way that yeah, well, really that whenever you're going to be answering the questions to what the people have, and you might even think too that really that whenever we're talking about questions and answers, right? And it sure seems that way that yeah, the job seems to be a lot harder than what like what it seemed like or something like that, or if anything, like people may say that yeah, you'll get used to it. You after about 5 days of working, and you might say is towards yeah, if anything, yeah, you'll get used to it. After a while, that seems like to me though that after about maybe 2 hours of speaking about something, and then knowing about what all that they're talking about. But really, that it sure seems that way. That whenever you do watch the news, a lot of times it sure seems that way. That yeah, that after 1 hour of speaking up about something, and 102 is toward it. Yeah, well, you didn't get to everybody's question. Well, really, that if anything, but so yeah. So it sure seems that way that the question would be is to where that yeah, this discussion right here is not the ticket. I'm like, yeah, it's not. I'm like, yeah, this discussion. This discussion is not to be discussing everything. So you cannot really, you cannot really talk about everything, and maybe if you cannot, really explain everything. So a lot of times, the first thing that you're going to maybe be thinking about is to where that yeah, that if you're going to be scheduling a meeting ahead of time, or if you're going to be maybe connecting on call about something, and that you want to know too is toward that yeah, somebody's going to be telling you that hey, I'll be able to explain everything to you, or if anything, well, really, that it's really hard for me to understand what you're saying. Whenever I'm like, yeah, you think that you can explain everything, but maybe you sometimes cannot talk about everything. So that's why it sure seems that way toward yeah, just to kind of keep it brief, and or if anything, that talk about is toward yeah. So it sure I'm like yeah, the topic's most important, and so I think that that's really about the press secretary will probably say too that anything that they're talking about, and 102 that talk about for most important, and to like yeah, whenever it comes to handling the pandemic, and then also taxes, and also job creation, and other things, but on the other hand, it sure seems that way that when we speak about the press secretary, and the speaker, and it sure seems that way that you want to know too that is yeah, well, really that if you're going to be talking if you're going to be talking for at least an hour, and you want to know too, does that really give you enough time to talk about a lot of stuff that they're talking about? And like everybody else might even say that, hey, well, really, that it really just tells us about the latest news about what's been going on. In our country. Like about every 3 weeks or so that there'll be an update, or if anything, it's about every 10 days that there's updates. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.